Hello, everybody. This is Faith at House Fraud Homestead. It's been a little while. Glad to be back. It's been a busy March and April so far, but I'm hoping to get back into the regular swing of things. And I am on here today with a video I have had planned for a while, but a comment on my Homemaking Without Kids and Religion video brought it to my attention again, and I wanted to go ahead and get that done since it seems like my channel is reaching an audience that has unfulfilled needs in this space, and that's namely atypical, non-traditional homemakers of various backgrounds who have a non-religious bent. And so what I wanted to talk about today is common criticisms of homemaking and potential downsides, downfalls, like the shadow side of homemaking. And in the more religious homemaking circles and homemaking social media, very often there are religious solutions to these issues. And the question arises, what do you do if you're not religious? If you can't point to the Proverbs 31 woman or the Titus 2 woman or instructions from a higher power to justify what you're doing, what do you do and how do you resolve these issues that can arise, and how do you address what can sometimes be valid criticisms of homemaking? And so I've tried to lump them into three broad buckets that I think are most common. And from my limited experience, having been a homemaker of some description for about 10 years, speak to what can be done about them without necessarily relying on biblical doctrine. So the first one that I think is most common, especially in social media, and that you'll see going around, is devaluation. And this can be from society, this can be from yourself, and even from your own family and household. The popular narrative for the last 50 to 70 years has been that homemaking is sexist, patriarchal, and obsolete fundamentally, and that anyone who is engaging in it is complicit in their own oppression, or wasting their time, or they're kept, or they're depressed. There's so many arguments against it that it's almost become a trope in the last several decades that if you say you're a homemaker, it's sort of like a pitiable state, or what else do you do is what is asked after that. Like it cannot be an end in its own right. It's always a failure to have become something more. And the shadow side of this kind of mentality is that it can lead us into a degree of martyrdom or listlessness if we're not really sure why we're doing what we're doing in the face of criticisms of it. And that doesn't really make us good ambassadors for the movement if we can't even say why we're doing what we're doing. So my response to that, if where religion would have you point to, he said so, is your main justification for why you're doing what you're doing. I think it's necessary to find sources of inspiration for the lifestyle you've chosen that align with your values, which may not be biblical values in this case. And just a disclaimer here, I'm not in any way trying to disparage Christian homemakers and biblical femininity and anything like that. I'm just speaking to an audience that has not been served by that content so far, so just get that out of the way. But I think it's important to have a why for your homemaking that is not what someone else is telling you should or shouldn't do. Even in my own household, my husband could take or leave 90% of what I do by way of homemaking, and I don't turn that into a source of resentment because I have my own reasons for doing what I do. So that can be an ecological, anti-capitalist kind of bent where you are trying to reduce your consumption for yourself and your household, It can be trying to reduce stress and hustle culture for yourself and your household. Any number of things can be a valid why for homemaking that doesn't require a deity to be instructing you there. But a big part of overcoming this devaluation is not devaluing yourself or your why. So it's easy to question, especially if your family is not seeming to respond well to your homemaking. Like if you watched Desperate Housewives, and you'll think of the Brie Vandekamp character, and all of her homemaking was kind of not popular with her family, who found it kind of pedantic and obsessive. So there are degrees to which the models of homemaking can be a disservice to our families and the other people we live with if they become so, Susie Homemaker, apron, 1950s picket fence kind of thing, that they're insincere. And that's a trap we can fall into if we're not sure why we're doing this sort of thing. We have very few templates to look to other than the Proverbs 31 woman and the 1950s housewife as models of what homemaking can be. And so if you're going against the grain and don't look to those models, you kind of have to choose your own adventure and create your own path there. But I'd say clinging to the values that you've identified for yourself, like, I want to live in a clean house, so I clean my house. Or I want nutritious home-cooked meals, so I make nutritious home-cooked meals, irrespective of what anybody else says I should be doing. That can keep you sane in a world and a house that will tell you that you should just, buy a frozen pizza every once in a while. So, and unfortunately, this does not always carry into broader society as a valid reason. It's easy to lose friends and respective peers if you are not gainfully employed in the capitalist system making actual money. And so that's not really something to be defensive about, I don't think. People in that paradigm are not going to see value in non-monetary forms like homemaking if they choose not to. But confidence goes a long way, and if you have that value system and are confident in it that you are doing what you're doing for reasons that are important to you, that eventually carries into how you present yourself and how you speak of yourself. If you're kind of the lowly, like, oh, I'm just a homemaker, I don't really do anything, like, that's the kind of thing that gives homemaking a bad name and will continue to invite disrespect from people around you. So try to again, to borrow some biblical language, shield and cloak yourself in your values, and try and take some inspiration in modalities of homemaking. I love Radical Homemakers by Shannon Hayes. That's a great book. You can also look to Parkrose Permaculture. I've shouted out her channel before on YouTube for non-religious homemaking content that is a breath of fresh air in a world that thinks any kind of analog lifestyle is obsolete and we should just be buying convenience products. And that leads me to my second bucket, which is despondency. And this can take various forms. It can be isolation and loneliness resulting from that. It can be a lack of purpose. And the schema we have for this is the 1950s housewife who's popping Valium and getting electroshock therapy to overcome the crippling ennui of being home all day. And I think it's worth considering that when we think of the 1950s housewife, that was the beginning of well, maybe not the beginning, but a step in the degradation of the homemaker from producer-in-chief in the house to consumer-in-chief. So, with the caveat that, it was not always voluntary, it was frequently involuntary that women were in these positions, homemaking lost a lot of its opportunities for creativity and fulfillment when the woman's primary role in the house, other than keeping up appearances, was consumer choice and making purchases with her husband's money. So you'll note that we went from homemaking to home economics, and girls were instructed on how to be savvy shoppers, and your only avenues for creative fulfillment might be, telling your decorator what colors you like or something like that, depending on what means you had. And yeah, that is a recipe for despondency. If you're no longer cooking from scratch and you're assembling jello salads, yeah, you're going to be really bored, really unfulfilled, and really isolated. Like the suburbs broke down a lot of the intergenerational community we'd have in other previous lifestyles. And so you're stuck in a box all day with or without children and without meaningful, and I think it stems from feeling like you're not meaningfully contributing because you're consuming. So that's not the model that we aspire to on this channel. I think a lot of purpose can be gleaned, from the values we discussed in the last section, and also from however it is possible to you. I'll eventually do a video on homemaking with executive function issues and neurodivergence and all that fun stuff. But it's important to carve in time to learn and to grow as a human in amongst the homemaking. It's very easy, even despite Maytag and microwaves and all the convenience products, it's still very easy to spend your whole day just pushing the boulder uphill, and we must imagine Sisyphus happy. But if every day, all day, is spent just going back to baseline, then yeah, that's a recipe for burnout and despondency and despair. So if you're growing yourself and your skill sets in some way and achieving things that stay done or that build on themselves, that is how you stay suspended above the feeling that none of this is worthwhile and none of this is fulfilling. So maybe that's as simple as, sourdough bread, for, to take a stereotype, or you could be learning something on the internet in your spare time. If you want to, I don't think it's a prerequisite to justifying your existence. You can start side hustles. Those are things that people do from a homemaking position, but we have, in this context, even if we're not doing it full time, there's generally in the homemaking lifestyle a little bit of bandwidth to find things that you're passionate about and that spark joy, so to speak, and to grow those, even if they're not necessarily practical. I think there's a lot of overlap between practical skills and hobbies that we don't talk about enough, but if you can carve in time to feel like you're cultivating your skills and yourself as a person, that goes a long way, even if it's not monetizable. And I think this is another video I made, I think it was my last one actually. Community is a big deal, and online community is not always a good substitute for that. It doesn't fire off our mirror neurons in the same way that face-to-face interaction does. And so if we're going to be in suburbs isolated from our extended families and kin groups, I think it's important to build community with the people close to us. And I have a whole video on how to overcome social anxiety, to talk to your neighbors and build that kind of community, but that goes a long, long way to keeping you suspended above the isolated and weird kind of funk you can fall into as someone who's home all the time. If you have good relationships with your neighbors and you can wave over the fence and have a pleasant conversation while you're home all day. So that'd be my recommendations there. And then this is the big elephant in the room that everyone uses to shut down homemaking as a viable choice that's not just symptomatic of patriarchal oppression. and that is dependency. And there are various flavors of dependency that one could fall into because fundamentally, it is a position of vulnerability to be a full-time homemaker. So, I don't gatekeep on this channel. I don't think you have to be married to be a homemaker, but if you're going to be full-time homemaking, that does come incumbent with financial risks. Because the reality of our world is that if you put homemaker on a resume, that's not really going to be something that people respect from an employment perspective. And I think it's prudent to have a worst case scenario plan B, irrespective of how stable your situation feels. That's not a commentary on the stability of your situation, but it is a valid point that the provider in your dynamic could die, could be disabled, could just leave you high and dry. And you don't want to be completely shafted in that instance. So there are various ways to not prepare for this inevitability as if it is inevitable, but to safeguard yourself so that you can relax into that more feminine role a little bit without being fearful. And one of those, I think, is, going back to pursuing skills and hobbies. Start cultivating a skill that's, if not monetized, that you can share with the community for value in small ways. I really try not to push the agenda that's if you're staying at home, then okay, you should be an entrepreneur. You should also be this. You should also be monetizing. But if you're concerned about being financially dependent on somebody, I think it's prudent to look into what skills and resources you have that you could fall back on in the event of losses with your provider situation. And this doesn't have to be racing back to hustle culture. If we look to what our grandmothers did, if they were widowed, if they were left, if they fell on hard times and had to subsist for themselves, you could take in boarders. Airbnb's a thing if you still have rights to your house after such a consideration. People pet sits, babysits, piano lessons. There's all kinds of things that you can do from home more or less without reverting back to hustle culture or being completely destitute. And I think it's also important to, going back to that community building element, have a network of people that you've built relationships with who have a sense of what your skill sets are. So like maybe your neighbors know that you're good to rely on for pet sitting or something like that. That can come in really handy if you find yourself needing extra cash in an emergency, and you can kind of build that network of folks who know you and know your circumstance and know your capabilities and can recommend you for that skill that you've cultivated. And I don't think there's any shame in looking into ways that you could lean on other people in that event. If folks know what your lifestyle is and you're not tucking your tail between your legs like, oh, I failed at homemaking because my boyfriend dumped me or something like that, then getting back on your feet again can be a lot easier. And there's also a ton of entry-level work-from-home jobs. So you don't necessarily have to stop being a homemaker if you're not provided for. I don't think you have to be provided for financially to be a homemaker at all. I think you can be a homemaker in your childhood bedroom and in your dorm room. And whether you're single, whether you have kids, it's a mindset. So even if we're not reliant on, or if we can't really point to biblical reasons for doing what we're doing, it's still possible to overcome these pitfalls of being in a slightly more dependent, slightly more devalued role in society and still validating ourselves. So I hope that was helpful. I know it can be hard to stay positive when it feels like society is has basically, gone the, taken you the route of the coal miner and, relegated you to a bygone era, when for me anyway, this is the only thing I've ever wanted to do, irrespective of who employs me. So, that's another point I forgot to make. Going back to despondency, I find that if you think of your provider person, whether it's a husband, boyfriend, whoever, as your employer, it is a lot easier to get resentful and martyred and bitter than if you feel like you're doing it for yourself. And that's something that is common in the biblical homemaking channels, is the notion of submission and putting yourself in a role relative to the provider in your life. And that's why I'm not a huge fan of the terms housewife and stay-at-home mom and things like that, because it makes your whole role dependent on those relationships. And so if you can kind of divorce yourself from the notion that to be a homemaker you have to have this provider person and they have to value what you're doing, it can be sanity saving. So just another bonus tip there for you. So thank you all for watching. Thank you for staying engaged with the channel while I was on hiatus. It was neat to look back and see that, especially that homemaking without kids religion video had still been getting some traction and resonating with you all. I think I am going to be focusing the channel more in that direction of the secular homemaking kind of lifestyle there, since that seems to be an unaddressed need. And I'm also, hopefully in the next few weeks, gonna talk about the homemaking and homesteading goals I have for 2023, because I'm finally starting to get going on those. I'm also considering, if anyone would be interested, let me know, a video on what considerations I took and why I am child-free at this point. I still intend to do one on why I'm stepping away from witchcraft, if that's of any interest. So it'll be a motley combination of things for a while, but I do appreciate the engagement with this channel and the support. I hope you guys got something out of this. If you have other suggestions or pitfalls you can think of with homemaking, go ahead and leave those in the comments. I'd love to know your thoughts. I hate asking to like, comment, and subscribe, but it really does help keep this channel with a pulse. So I appreciate the engagement. So have a good one. Bye.